Discipline is a very controversial topic in today's society. Discipline can come in many different types and forms, and people's opinion on the subject is vastly different. There are many people in the world today trying to remove much of the discipline that has existed for kids. There are some people in the world claiming that many forms of discipline hurt kids, and that we should always let our kids make their own choices and suffer the consequences accordingly. Obviously, this is not God's stance on the matter. In Proverbs 13:24, it says that he who withholds the rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. Obviously, discipline is important in our parenting. It's something that's important to God, and it's not a topic that can be ignored. But timing and methods are something that can be discussed. And when we say discipline, our minds often go to punishment, but obviously that's only part of it. Discipline can come in many different forms, as I said. It could be instruction and verbal correction as well as the punishment, so that's something to keep in mind. Many people look at their small children and say that they're just kids, and kids make mistakes, and they let a lot of things slide. But when do we stop that? When do we start actually taking action to end the bad things that our kids are doing and get past the they're just a kid mentality?
You don't let them get started. I mean, you start from an early age, they have to respect you. And I mean, you set those boundaries. I mean, we teach our kids not to interrupt when we're talking to people. Well, you start that at a young age. It's just little, I guess, baby steps towards certain things. But when you start young, that respect grows and develops.
I was thinking of Proverbs 23, verse 13, where it says, "Do not withhold correction from a child. If you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell." And sometimes we kind of read that and chuckle a little bit, I think, and just thinking about the image that brings to our mind. But really, the weight of that passage is that there's a consequence to not disciplining or correcting your kids. You know, we have numerous examples in Scripture of children whose parents didn't do a very good job of correcting and disciplining and training, and we see the outcome was really their destruction as adults, the destruction of their relationship with God. And so, you know, I'd rather instill some pain that's controlled as a parent and give them enough to realize that there's certain actions that result in bad consequences and have them experience that young than have them not understand that and grow to be adults and have the terrible pain and sometimes eternal consequences that come from disregarding the laws God's established.
When they're real little, even under age 1, you just know as a mom and a dad when it's time to start the discipline process. And you know, they're no longer a newborn, they're no longer a week old, and they either give you that look or they'll flail their arm. And you know, you start early on, like Bridget said, early on, and it can be as simple as a strong no in their face. Very stern look, no. I mean, Clay would melt down just by that.
Yeah, they learn the meaning of the word no at a very young age.
And
they
then,
understand what that means.
And then that transitions to a swat. You know, you can swat them on the hand. No. You know, and then of course, you know, you get past age 1 and to those age and where they're really starting to test you, and that's when the spankings start. And we've all been around those kids that aren't disciplined at all, and they're out of control. And it does bring shame. The Bible talks about how that brings shame to the mom, and it does, and it brings shame to both parents when the kid's just allowed to do whatever they want to do. So like Bridget said, I mean, you started at an early age. It just kind of progresses how it changes.
I think we establish in our kids' minds at a very early age what to expect about how they're allowed to behave, but also what to expect about our involvement in how they behave. I mean, we can see already, Claire's 8 months old, we can already see, you know, when she's crawling towards a power cable or something, we say, hey, don't do it. She kind of looks at us knowing, okay, you're telling me something, but do I keep doing what I want to do or do I listen to you? And she's only 8 months old, and you can just tell her thought process is, okay, what are you trying to tell me right now?
And she listens sometimes too.
Sometimes she does. She's learning.
She'll
when-
not touch a cable
you know.
when we ask her
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
The harder thing is when what the kid's doing wrong is kind of cute, and
Yeah.
we kind of like let them get away with that. And then, Bridget and I sometimes have said that we need to envision our kids doing that same thing when they're 12. Is that going to be cute
Yeah.
then?
Yeah.
And maybe that motivates us to discipline promptly.
Even something as simple as, don't touch the TV remote. Some people think, well, it's just a TV remote. It's not that big of a deal. I told them no, but it doesn't matter too much. But what about that time when you're outside and they're running towards the street and you shout no? If you've established in that kid's mind that they don't have to listen to you when you say no, that's a much more serious situation. So you establish in their mind how they are to react to you regardless of the situation. I think it's very important for those times when it does matter.
Yeah, good parenting involves consistency, right? Consistency.
That's a great point. And I've had times as a parent that I've regretted saying I was going to do something if my kids did this, because then I feel like I've got to follow through, and I may not be motivated at that moment to follow through, but I said this is the consequence if you do that. So it's tough sometimes.
Yeah, starting off early, when they're very young, the word no can be effective a lot of times. They understand that. But it's like Laurie said, there comes a point in time where things are done out of rebellion, or things are done out of a strong will, and you can tell it. You can tell on their face, see it in their eyes, the motivation for doing something.
They're all different too. Like our oldest one, we could just look at her and tell her no, and she would, like you said, melt down. Child number 3 wasn't quite like that, and it was like a war zone when she needed it. But it's just, and with her, we had to start spanking a lot earlier, so your kid's gonna let you know, at an early age, if they're gonna be that stubborn, strong-willed child that wants their way, or the one that is gonna listen to you. But with 6 kids, we have 6 very different discipline modes for all of them. They're all very different.
We've touched on it a little bit, but what type of discipline is beneficial for kids when they're at a very young age, maybe the 1-2 years old, as opposed to being older?
Spankings. Spankings with a paddle. A piece of good advice we got early on that we always used was to spank with something other than your hand, because then it's not associated with you hurting them. You're using an instrument, like the Bible speaks of a rod, using something else to give the spanking. So we used a wooden spoon that had slats in it, so holes, so it stung. And we had 3 of them. We had one that we kept on the downstairs, one we kept in our upstairs, and then we had one we kept at the church building. And they knew what those meant.
And like Laurie was saying, it reminds me of Proverbs 13:24. It says, "He who withholds his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him gently." And we had never even thought of this until Bob Archer gave a lesson on it, and he talked about, not using your hand. The Bible talks about a rod. It doesn't talk about your actual hand. And I really do think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I really do, because a rod is a third-party object. It's not you. So I think God really has a lot of wisdom in that.
We were given that same advice, and the person that told us was like, you use your hand to hug them, you use your hand to hold their hand, you use it to stroke their head when they're going to sleep, whatever. You don't want it to be associated with a spanking. Now, that's not to say there hasn't been times that they've done something, you reach up and pop them, but, it kind of pierced my heart when they told me that, because I hadn't really thought about it that way. You don't want them to, every time they see your hand, to think, oh, great, I'm going to get hit, so.
Yeah, I think our boys were 4 or 5. I think Will was before we heard that lesson and switched.
And it's a good visual reminder when they see it, because again, you don't want them always looking at your hands thinking those are forms of punishment, but they see that paddle. They knew where we kept it. They knew where we kept the wooden spoon on the first floor and the second floor, and where it was at the church building. they saw it as a visual reminder, I better act right or I will see that later, you know.
Going back to what Cody was bringing up earlier, the idea of these young children, for me at least, one of the biggest challenges of being a young parent with young kids was you're just so tired. You know, it's just, you're not sleeping, the kid is screaming, it's 3 a.m. You know, how do you control that? And so making a distinction between times when there's discipline needed and times when there's just love and affection needed is a tough thing to do, but it's important because, you know, as a father, Ephesians 6:4, which we've already talked about a little bit, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. You know, I need to be very cautious about the effect of my involvement with my kid, whether it's an affectionate involvement or a corrective involvement, and the devil's going to be constantly, you know, trying to find ways to get me to mess that up, and I'm going to probably mess that up at times. I know I have many times. I've let my emotions get in the way of making the right decision about what I need to be doing as a father. But again, going back and understanding what God's Word says about this subject and reflecting on that, meditating on it a lot, praying to God about it a lot, helps you be a better parent, I believe, especially with those young kids as you're just trying to figure things out and overcome the tiredness and all the things associated with being a young parent.
Not disciplining when you're angry. Letting your emotions calm down, because some of the stuff they do really makes you mad and you just want to dole out punishment then. But it really is better to wait and say, you are going to be getting a spanking for that. I need you to go sit in your room until we come in there. Gives them time to think about it and gives you time to cool down, you know, because you don't really, effective discipline is done not in the heat of the moment. It's done when you're calm, you know, so you can talk about it and they can see you don't enjoy doing it, you know, and you don't want to have to repeat it. And that always helped us. Now, when they're real little, I mean, you really do have to discipline right away because they don't have the memory to know what they did an hour ago. But as they age, obviously, then you can wait. Say, you're going to get punished in about 30 minutes, you know.
So on that note, how does our discipline change as our kids get older? So now they're getting into middle school, high school time of their life. How does it change? What looks different?
For us, we spanked up until about age 10, probably. And at that point in time, we transitioned into a more you lose privilege. So, and they lose whatever's most important to them. Whatever at that period of time in their life is most important. If it's their video game console, if it's TVs, if it's their telephone, that's what they lose. You've got to make it meaningful to them, right? If it's not meaningful and consistent, it's not effective. So,
Wouldn't it be appropriate, really, to spank my high schooler at this point? He's bigger than me, you know, and it's, you know, again, the method has to change at some point. And not saying we had the magic age, that just was
Yeah,
what
that's
for us
subjective,
was
right?
late elementary school. We realized that the spankings weren't working as well as taking away what they really liked, you know. So that's when we changed.
They get to a point that as a parent, you start having to make judgments about there's certain activities that they're going to do that may not be sinful and terribly destructive. You know that's not the best choice they're making, but you're going to let them bear the consequence of that choice. And maybe it's, you know, sleeping too late and being late for school, or, you know, not getting enough study done and doing very poorly on exams, or, you know, sometimes just that consequence where they realize, yikes, you know, I should back up and do that, and then talk to them about it is a form of discipline that you're purposefully doing, but it's not you directly, you know, causing some punishment for them. It's just letting them bear the consequence of their action.
yeah, I think also a really important part of discipline, you need to explain to your children why they're being disciplined, right? You know, some of the olden days stuff, you see parents not wanting to talk to their kids, or it's because I said so, don't you worry, it's because I said so. You know, I think And granted, parents, have a right to guide their children the way they should, but I think it's important to the children to know every time why they're being disciplined, and for it to be very clear, and for it not to be.
Yeah, and we would have the boys repeat it back to us. We would say, "Now, why are you getting a spanking right now?" And it was amazing that sometimes they truly did not know, even after they had just done that behavior, but they had already forgotten what they had done. And so we would make them repeat back, "I'm getting in trouble because I did this, and I'm getting punished again because I lied about it," or whatever. But repeating it back is important because to show them ownership in what they did.
Right, because why do we discipline our kids? Because we love them and we want what's best for them, right? So we owe them that to try to guide them and explain it to them why they're getting this discipline, because we love them and we want them to, improve. So.
Yeah, because a lot of times it's not just because we said so. There's a reason behind it. We don't want you to get hurt, or we don't want this to affect you negatively, down the line, or whatever that may be. There's a reason behind what we're doing. It's not because I said so all the time.
Yeah.
Something Bridget touched on earlier that I wanted to ask about is the differences in our kids. Each kid's going to be different from one to the next. So how do we change the way we handle discipline from one kid to the next? Does it change with the kid?
Yes and no. I mean, because on one hand, you need to be consistent. It wouldn't be fair to always punish one kid and one kid gets away with everything, right? You need to be consistent on how you punish. But on the other hand, like Bridget alluded to, some kids are more stubborn than others. And so your method and what you do has to be different. They may need an extra spanking, or they may need a harsher word. And then you have another child who just absolutely crumbles at any disapproving eyes you give them. And you can be like, no. And then that's all they needed, really. Definitely as they get older, it probably needs to be more consistent on what the punishment is. Although what you take away from them will probably be different, because what's important to one child may be video games, or a phone, the other kid, it's their phone, or spending time with their friends, or whatever. So.
Well, you can't punish one kid for a specific act and then another kid do that same specific act and they get the eyeball. That's just not fair. So you do have to have a little bit of a guideline. Lying, obviously, at our house always got a spanking. It didn't matter if you even crumbled when you realized what you had done, you still had to suffer that consequence. But, there's just some kids that take a harsher. Some can sit in a timeout and they totally get it. And some need that strong rod. But you have to be consistent with all your kids on the same.
Well, the thing I've learned as a parent, that I don't know that I would have understood this so much had we not just had the family structure we ended up with, where we had an older group of kids and younger group of kids. But we're kind of going through the same experience a second time with the second group of kids, but it's different, because with the second group of kids, they see the consequences that the older kids have experienced at times. It's really made an impression. And so as you think about the different dynamics with different kids, it's partly based on their personality, that some kids are just going to respond differently. Some are going to be really strong-willed, and this is just an observation. I think there's examples in Scripture of this, where there's some really strong-willed people that, when that will's directed in the right way, they're going to be the heroes of society. They're going to be some of the heroes of the Bible are like that. They have a will to push forward in spite of the most difficult circumstance. You got to know how to direct that as a parent and not squash it. On the other hand, there's other kids that are very reserved and cautious, and you got to build them up and help them to have some courage. And so maybe you're disciplining them in that area, but just having that consistency that Bridget and Laurie were talking about, and Chris, was that it has an effect on the other kids. So your role as parent, or the involvement, changes a little bit over time.
Well, the other kids see them getting in trouble, and I feel or I have, when one of them's gotten in trouble, I'll tell the others why they got in trouble in hopes that maybe they don't go down that same path, you know. But our 3 older ones think our 3 younger ones don't get nearly as many spankings, but they witnessed a lot of the stuff, and they haven't really gone that same, not to say they haven't had any, but it's like they've learned through observation and examples. And so when you discipline one, I don't think you should hide it from the other kids while they were, you know, I mean, that way, because it's a learning lesson for all of them.
And the consistency, you know, that Kyle's talking about, it's so important to be consistent, because you don't want discipline for one kid to think you're showing favoritism by, you know, well, I always get punished and you never punish the other. That would be horrible, and that would, you know, instill bitterness, I think. It's very important to be consistent. I mean, God disciplines his children. We're told that. He disciplines us all. Our reactions to it may be different, you know, but he's not going to show favoritism by disciplining some and not others, you know.
Something that we've touched on is that a big part of disciplining kids, if not the main reason for disciplining our kids, is to teach them, you know, how they should or how they shouldn't act, to teach them to behave the way that they're supposed to behave. How do we determine in these various situations that require discipline, how do we determine when that situation calls for punishment or simply verbal instruction?
I would say they usually go together the vast majority of the time. You know, the punishment and then the verbal instruction is to, you know, making it clear where they went wrong and, you know, what they need to do going forward.
And also making a distinction, are they ignorant or are they rebellious? Have I told them this? Have I taught them this? If I've taught them this and maybe repeatedly taught them this, and it's obvious they're just rebelling against it, that's a whole lot different than having a kid that just doesn't know any better yet. So.
Important with all of this is you have to be united as parents on discipline. If you disagree on if something should be disciplined or not, I mean, you need to have that conversation behind closed doors and decide it before you ever approach the kid. They will sense the parents aren't on the same page, and they will take that opportunity to use that to their advantage. So whatever discipline is decided, you have to be united on it.
Well, and what you're asking about, Cody, made me think about, you know, God is our perfect Father in every way, and when Paul talks about the things that he had done wrong earlier in his life, he's writing to Timothy, and he says, although I was formerly a blasphemer, a persecutor, and an insolent man, but I obtained mercy because I did it ignorantly in unbelief. Now, when we think about Paul's conversion, we think about how he really went through a short period of suffering. When he was on the road to Damascus, he was blind, he was unsure, there was a sense of discipline, correction there, but he reflected on that and said, I obtained mercy. God was showing me the right way because he saw I was doing it ignorantly. If I apply that to my role as a father, I need to realize there's times when my kids just don't know, and they may suffer a little bit for a short time as they're learning, but hopefully they look back on that and they realize my dad was showing me mercy in helping me to see what I needed to know to be the kind of person I need to be.
Yeah, you know, in regards to discipline, we're all human beings, right? We make mistakes sometimes, and there's been a handful of times where I made a mistake in discipline, and I've gone to my kids and I've gotten down on my knees and I said, you know, will you forgive me? And I think there's a real powerful lesson there to the kids, because when you do that, their eyes get big and they're just they're taken back, like it blows their mind. But there's definitely a powerful lesson there for that. We can't be unwilling to admit if we do make a mistake.
Teaching them, and I've done it too, you know, gone to them and said, I shouldn't have punished you for that. I think them hearing that and you apologizing to them teaches them so many valuable lessons on how to own up to when you make mistakes, and that, you know, we're going to make mistakes as parents too. And I think that's why there's wisdom, and sometimes when they're older, waiting to think about things. And sometimes you just discipline before you know all the facts, and you should have waited as a parent to hear all the facts first. And then you just feel horrible that you punished before you got all that information. And but you know, kids for the most part are very willing to forgive. And I think it really does teach them that valuable lesson when you can say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done it. And they'll be like, okay, mommy, it's okay, you know, or and then too, hearing us pray about it later. You know, I've had many prayers in front of my boys when I'm with them, and ask God to forgive me for the times I've made mistakes as a parent, and asked Him to give me wisdom to do better as a mom. And they hear that, and they know I'm trying, you know. So.
Well, thank you guys for your input and all your thoughts on the topic of discipline. We've got more topics to discuss, so we'll get to those shortly.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and our Facebook page for notifications about more content like this.